I want to start with democracy. So, democracy, we have learned so far democracy from Plato and Aristotle's perspective. That means very ancient definition of democracy. But we have to go a little bit deeper. What is modern democracy? The main difference between the Greek democracy and modern democracy is whether whether there is election or not. So in an ancient democracy, it's direct democracy. So people participate directly in politics. But modern democracy is indirect democracy, which means we select our deputy, our representatives by election, and our representatives should reflect what we want, and then he or she is doing as we want. That's we call accountability. So because of these differences, we have to define what is definition of democracy in modern times. In the world globally, there are a lot of different types of regime: democracy, authoritarian, kingship, oligarchy, dictatorships. So we will learn the different various definition of non-democracies uh, next week. So when we meet in person to person, we will talk about it. But I wanted to show uh, the world map in terms of regime type. So if you look at, then this is America and Canada, right? So these countries are democracy and the military regime. So military have power in Latin America a lot, and multi-party. So multi-party so there are multi-party different kinds of parties, but it doesn't mean that they are democracy. So the military, sometimes the political party, they can exercise its own power, and then um, they hold power, but they are not democracy. There's kinds of regime like that, and single party. So they're like China is very one of the representative of single party regime. That means the single party only they have one party, and then even though the leaders has been changed, right? So leader changed over time, but there is only one political party, and this party select their own leader, and then leader might be changed, but the political party doesn't change. In North Korea, it's a single party, but it's not right. It's dictatorships, right? So the father of Kim Il Sung, and after he is died, after his death, another son, Kim Jong Il, has a power, and then Kim Jong Un. So it's a patriarchy kind of regime type. So there are different kinds of regime type in the world. Monarchy is kingship, so king rule the society. So there are some monarchy here and democracy, but you can see like because of the map in terms of number, we felt like there are a lot of single party, but the democracy in terms of number of country, democracy is most. The most of countries are democracy, or they at least claim to be democracy. The regime is form of government, so democracy is one of the regime types. So we have a single regime, single party regime, dictatorships. They are all authoritarian. So we call this regime. A regime is a form of government. So there are different forms of government in the world. And the members of social organization who are in power, it's a form of government who are in the government, the members of social organization who are in power. So elected, sometimes elected, but sometimes they got a power by their power. So like for instance, we some made coup d'état, right? So coup d'état throughout the coup, sometimes people came to power, but I mean, whether it doesn't mean that they are elected, right? So when we talk about the members of social organization who are empowered, doesn't necessarily means they are elected. So if they are elected, these members of social organization who are in power are elected, we call this democracy. But if the members of social organization who are in power got a power throughout the coup, then we call this dictatorships. So how they are in power, that's actually a decision. That's the decide of what forms of government. So if they have power throughout the coup, we call this dictatorship, or throughout if their father, usually kingships, it's the blood, the power transfer based on the blood, right? Then we call this usually kingships. So it matters how these people came to power. Who are in the power? Autocracy is governed by a single individual. Oligarchy governed by a few people. Plutocracy governed by the wealthy people. So there are so many types of government, form of government, depending on how we look at. So whether we look at the government in terms of wealth, or whether we look at in terms of number. So how many people are in power, or how do they came to power? So usually these modern times we look at the government, form of government, how do they came to power? That matters most. So a regime is a general form of government or state, including its constitutions and rules of government. So if we have a government, then we have a laws, right? Rules, constitutions. If we call this republic, when we call republic is when we look at the government from the law perspective. So if the government is ruled by the law, we call this republic. So even though the president changed, we do not change the republic, right? So 공화국 in Korean. So like we have like first republic, second republic. It's based on the whether the law has been changed or not. So if law changed, then republic has been changed. So for a long time, even though the leader changed, but we do not call the republic has been changed because of law. The rules of government, a way to select a leader. Democracy, when we talk about democracy, we can divide into two perspectives, whether it's dichotomous or gradual. The dichotomous approach is A or B. So whether a state democracy or not. So if we categorize into two, we call this dichotomous approach. So definition of democracy, when we talk about when we approach to define democracy from dichotomous approach, it's about whether a state is democracy or not. So that at the time that we focus on usually the minimal approach. So if a country met minimum level of definition, then we can categorize that country as democracy. So like ranges can be vary, right? So because the like for instance the U.S. to Singapore is not democracy. Mexico, Ecuador, like that. So but the level in terms of level of democracy, U.S. is we call full-fledged democracy, so well liberal democracy, right? But Ecuador, Mexico are democracy, but it's minimum. They met minimum level, but it doesn't mean that they are full-fledged democracy. We just think that Singapore, Mexico is just democracy in terms of minimum level. So there are, I mean, even though we can divide into two groups, right? So democracy or non-democracy. But if we will look at the democracy group, but we can see a lot of difference within the groups, so from U.S. to Ecuador, and then it's the same from non-democracy section as well. So the least democratic country in the world might be North Korea, but Singapore is not a democracy, but it has a lot of democratic values, right? And China even, China is not a democracy, but we can find some democratic values. In China, inside of China, we have Taiwan, and Taiwan they select their own leader in a democratic way. So we can see there is range barriers within the group. So that's the I mean we can find some what is disadvantage and advantage. So advantages is we can see easily whether a country democracy or not, right? But the disadvantage of this approach is we can't say that within the group how much different within the group. So like America is well developed, but Ecuador is not. But if we just divide into two, we can never tell, right? So how different it is. And democracy is a regime in which a fully qualified citizens vote at regular intervals to choose from among ultimate candidates the people who will be in charge of setting the state's policy. So let's dissect this sentence. A democracy is a regime, right? So we have learned a regime is a system, a form of government in which where a fully qualified citizen. So according to the law, what is fully qualified citizen is may be different. Sometimes fully qualified citizens in a certain country is over 16 years old, right? Or Korea is 18 years old. If it's you are 18 years old or more, then you are qualified. But some country is different. But we can't actually say like, oh, your country's qualified citizen is 18 years old, so you're not a democracy. We can't say that. So it depending on the law. So, but if law designated qualified citizens, then these qualified citizens should vote at regular intervals. So it depends on the country. Like certain country, like president election 5 years or 4 years. It depending on countries, right? So, but it should be regular interval. So we have to know what is next election. If we never know what is next election, then it doesn't qualify the at interval level. So at interval levels, we have to know what is our next elections to choose from among ultimate candidate. That's also means that we have to have at least two different candidates. But look at China. China we cannot say it's ultimate candidate even though there are different kinds of candidates. It's because they all belong to one political party, right? CCP. So if to choose among ultimate candidates, the candidate have at least we have two different candidates, and these two different candidates should belong to two different kinds of political parties, or at least one belong to one political party, but the other one doesn't have political party. That's independent. It's possible also, but at least these two candidates should be totally different. Like South Korea, we had a election, but there were two candidates, but the other candidate was actually was fake. So the first candidate want to be a president, so he put just like fake candidate. This candidate doesn't have any power. They can't do anything about it. That we cannot call this situation as ultimate candidate. And then the people who will be in charge of setting the state's policy. That means, so if we select A, for instance, there was an election, and then if we choose A over B, then the A should be charged of the setting the state's policy. So for instance, we select A, but A doesn't do anything, and the B is doing something. That's actually not democracy. So we get rid of 박근혜, right? Because 박근혜 was selected, so she is charged of setting the state's policy. But who was behind of her? 최순실, right? So 최순실 was in charge of setting the state's policy. That's why at the time the government actually break the rules of democracy. What's the definition of democracy? So it weakens the definition of democracy at the time. So that's why it became a problematic. That's why she went jail for that. So like the old people, like she didn't do anything wrong and she just have a bad friend, but that's not right. If she made a mistake, she committed the crime that she gave her power to the person we never know, right? So that's the definition of democracy. That's the minimum level of democracy. So a fully qualified citizen should vote. That's number one, and at regular intervals. So we have to know what's our next election. And third, there must be at least two different candidates. And four, the people who were elected should be charged of the government policy. And so fully qualified citizen, both citizen, usually adult. So and there must be free and fair election. So here adult means qualified citizen, usually fair election. So even though I educated more than you, but it doesn't mean that I have two votes, right? That's unfair. So fair means here every citizen should have same vote, same number of votes account. That's free and fair election, and at regular intervals there must be limited terms. So Yoon Suk-yeol's power will be over within 3 years. There is a limited term. So the president have 5 year term. That's a limited term, and politicians have 4 year limited term. So there is limited term. So we know that there will be another election after 4 year later. Choose from among alternate candidates. So there must be more than two candidates or political parties. The people who will be in charge of setting the state's policy, chosen candidates will be the leader, not others. That's the minimum definition of democracy. So we will discuss whether this we need more than this to satisfy the minimum level of democracy. And from the dichotomous approach, the most effective way to look at is freedom of score. So if you Google freedom of score, you can see whether a certain country is democracy or not. So they divide into three: free, partly free, not free. So usually, if country are categorized as a free, then it's democracy. If a country is either categorized either partly free or not free, they are non-democracies. So you can see it's very fun to compare this freedom of score and this this democracy index. So there are a lot of index or measurement whether a country is democracy or not. And then if you look at the democracy index, then it's more gradual approach. They take more gradual approach. But freedom of score is whether a country is democracy or not. So it's dichotomous approach. So if you just want to know whether a country is democracy or not, you just look at freedom of score. Then you can easily interpret. So if you look at the map, then it's usually overlapped with here, but this is different, right? So I think it's Mongol, right? So Mongol, some measurements say it's not democracy, but some measurements say it is democracy. So it is a little different. But it's pretty sure these countries are not democracy in the world, and they are partly free. right? So even though there, I mean, so partly free countries is like that. Either, even though they have election, but that election is not really free and fair, or even though the partly free country they do not have election, but there are some freedoms within the government. So there are checks and balance within the government. That's the not free country, but a partly free country. But if country is categorized as a not free, then there is definitely no election. But even though there is election, their election is not fair and free. So like North Korea, they have election, but the election is not free and fair. In China, they have election, but the election is not free and fair. So that's why they're categorized as not free country. And then this is dichotomous approach. This is not dichotomous approach. This is gradual approach. So gradual approach, you can see like there is a full democracy, flow democracy, hybrid regime, authoritarian regime. So you can see like there is varies within the regime. So flow democracy and full democracies, they are democracies. We can categorize like that way. But I mean, he this index actually shows that there are differences. So if you get a 9.10, 9 to 10, then it's perfect democracy. That's the well developed democracy. And if they got score 8 to 9, then it's less developed. But flow democracy, they are democracy, but there are some disadvantages. So we can see the differences. And the interesting thing is here is that Canada is 9 to 10, but US you can see like the score 7 to 8. So it shows the retreat of democracy. I mean South Korea. I mean I will show different one. It's 2023, but if you look at the map 2024, it has been changed a little. I'll show later on, but that's the when I make this presentation, that was the most recent one, and you can see like how varies in terms of how we look at. So from gradual approach, you can see more color here. That means it's really hard to categorize a country in terms of level of development. So every country has different perspective, right? So we will see the Belton autocratizer in 2023. I wanted to show this one. Why I wanted to show this one? So this one is Belton. That means it looks like a bell, right? So South Korean case is very unique case because it's still democracy, but it returned to 2014. So 2014, the level of democracy was only 0.6. And then, of course, Korea is democracy, but it has been developed pretty much, right, over here. So it's a Moon Jae-in's government, right? But South Korea has retreated pretty quickly after the Yoon Suk-yeol government. So that means some country, I mean, even though a certain country became a democracy and then they can return to non-democracy, like Turkey is a great example. I will show you next week what happened to the Turkey, but South Korea also is a great example that if we choose wrong leader, then what happened to the regime? So South Korea retreat, backsliding to non-democracy. Korea is still democracy, but the level of democracy has been retreated. And then look at Armenia. So Armenia has been developed pretty quickly, but it returned to the liberal democracy index has been fell pretty quickly, like that way. So it's always possible. So we have to cautious. You have to be cautious that our country is democracy, but we can't never say it will stay still or it will develop always. we can't always return like South Korea, like Armenia or Turkey. We will see why is that so next week.